Yeah. And we go, you're touching on like so much that's so powerful there. Like one of the things that I've been saying for years is that for many of our students, you've got the IEP and there's a
Correct.
team, right, who are like,
Right.
social workers, psychologists, right, learning expert,
Sure.
folks who are
Right.
part of that team at the school. The part of the power that every young person has who has an IEP is that team is actually theirs, and they can determine who's on that team. They can add people on if they want. Our coaches should be a part of the IEP team.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Never thought
Yeah.
about that.
Right. So,
Okay.
so again, part of the work is empowering our young people, empowering our families, and in some cases, empowering our educators.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to KROSS BARZ, the podcast where we discuss interesting topics with alternative perspective. I'm your co-host, Big O, and I have with me.
And you got Tanae in the building, back in full effect, ready.
Tanae, you looking good, looking vibrant. I see you.
Thank you very
You know what
much.
I mean? All right, I see you. I see you. All right. Who's our guest? Can you introduce the guest, Tanae?
Absolutely. We have the Mr. LeDerick Horne on our podcast. So give it up for Mr. Horne, everybody. Give it up.
Hello.
Oh,
All
man.
right.
So Mr. Horne, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from? You know what I mean? What do you do? What are some of the aspects of your contribution to society?
So I'm from Jersey, from Central Jersey, New Brunswick area, born and raised, and still live in Franklin Township. And
hold up, you live in the Grove?
I'm pretty close to the Grove, but I'm about two blocks away from Parkside, though.
All right, hold up, they gentrified you yet?
They close.
Oh,
yeah.
Yo, shout out to Lady and Man over there. Yeah, I know. Yeah, no, listen, my cousin Pooh back in the day used to live over there, and I was like, yo, this is kind of cool. It kind of remind me of back, my little hood. I was like, I didn't know they had this. I thought y'all moved up. I was like, yeah, we moved out of the Plainfield projects and moved to the Franklin projects.
That's it. Yeah, a lot. Particularly during like the '90s when they were knocking down a bunch of spots. A lot of people moved out this way. But yeah, the Grove is hung strong. They got a little paint on the wall and that kind of stuff. Parkside, I mean, when I grew up, Parkside was all 2-story brick buildings, and now it's a very different vibe. I was just taking my cousins who were down in Atlanta who grew up out there they came up for my grandmother just had a 90th birthday party, and
shout out to grandma.
Yeah. So I drove them around. It was like, wow, whole new world. But that's true for this whole area. Brunswick has changed so much. And people all over the country are dealing with this. But yeah, so I'm from Jersey. I in college started writing poetry, and so I'm known as a poet, and I'm also an advocate for people with disabilities. And I got to that work because I was diagnosed with having a learning disability when I was 9 years old. Went through special ed. In some ways, I was very blessed with my experience going through the school system, but in other ways, it was very traumatic. And so when I got into college, I was a part of some great support programs that taught me that I could write, taught me that I was strong at math, taught me really, how to leverage my strengths to deal with the places where I had challenges. And so when I graduated, I was fortunate to start doing advocacy work to try to improve our school system and make the way easier for the next generation of folks, coming up with similar challenges.
Oh my goodness. So I'm just thinking right now, like we're looking at a purple unicorn. You was in special ed and, from that area, and you're doing well for yourself. Yo, congratulations, man. You made it.
Thank you, Big O. I appreciate that, brother.
Yeah, you made it. You made it. They should have a poster in you, because I'm telling you right now, I was one of the persons in my youth that was scared to death of special ed.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because in my particular school, it was like they contained you in such a way, whereas when they got out, it was different.
Yeah.
And a lot of it, I didn't realize the different levels of special ed. Like some people may have had a behavioral IEP. And when I say IEP, I want to make sure I let everyone know what the initials, because I hate it to death when people give me initials and we're in different fields. Since initial for you may be a different initial for me. I hate
Yeah.
you, social workers. Yes, I do. Y'all hit me with a, yeah, Jay to the night. And you're on mute, so I don't know what she's doing. Jay today is clean on mute right now. So yeah. So
Not bad.
there you go. So what happened is, right, some students were behavioral classified, then others was academically classified. So when I say IEP, that's an individualized education plan, whereas they the educators in the school come up with a specialized plan for that particular child to get them to the level they need to get to be promoted or to pass the grade level or even test.
Right.
Yeah.
And where I looked at it was like everything I saw was really behavior. Like
Mhm.
I didn't even see the other side because of the location I was at. Because I had kids that just didn't have, like what we would say is, he just ain't right.
Yeah.
He don't have no chill.
Right.
This is before, the real terms came out for it. Like he got ADHD. No, they can't sit still. You
Right.
know what I mean? So he need an ass whooping. Excuse me, language. So some of my biasness always came from like, he ain't supposed to let take a short bus. Be like, yo, this cat gonna be fighting every day because
Yeah, yeah, and as someone who was on that short bus, you internalize a lot of those beliefs. I mean, that those are, what you're expressing are uh, cultural beliefs embedded in our school system, embedded in our community, embedded in our families, and and you can imagine, for me. I started out I was in a private school, started out at, in St. Peter's in kindergarten, got to first,
money. Oh, okay. Yeah.
got to first grade and couldn't do the work, and then had to do the first grade twice. And they eventually, in so many words, turned to my parents and said, you should send him back to district. We can't help him here. And, yeah. And then I got to third grade and then got diagnosed. And that was the moment that I remember, like my education had changed when I went to a different bus stop and I had to jump up on a short bus. And you're right in that, my experience going through school is one of segregation. It's one of being at the classroom at the end of the hall, and a lot of the social emotional scars that come from segregation, from being in a school that where it was sort of a softly spoken understanding that we didn't have the same potential as everybody else. And, and there are those of us who, may have disabilities that fall in line with behavior, but then there's also a sort of natural human response to being treated poorly. And if you're in an educational system where you're not treated well, where you're not valued, I mean, some of us are going to react to that. Regardless of what may be going on with us neurologically, right? But yeah, man, I understand that I am a statistical outlier. There are, I remember hearing a stat that was something like you had a better probability of being a high school basketball player and playing for the NBA than you did of being a student with a learning disability and getting a college degree. That there's a very, very small, unfortunately, a very, very small number of us who go as far as I have. And the focus of my work is for my journey to be the norm. Like, what do we need to do? What do we need to give our kids? What do we need to put out here in the culture, in our society, to change the conversation and our perception of folks who are like me.
Okay.
I want to say something. I saw one of your videos, and in the videos you were talking about, just like you were saying, being in kindergarten, it's great. You have the blocks we can play. Hey, kindergarten's wonderful, did that. But then when you got to first grade, it was different because now you had to, sit in a chair all day. And then there was a time limit. And then all of those things change, just from kindergarten to first grade.
Yeah.
So when you do your talking and you're talking to educators, do you give them some clues or some things that they could do to bridge the transition, or what do they usually say about that part of it?
Well, at the root of that comment when I tell that story is to make the point about, in part, it's like, what is disability, right? And one of the ways to think about what disability is that it's what happens when someone's biology meets an environment that was not designed for them, right? So if I'm someone who needs to move, right, I'm good in kindergarten, right? Because we're on the rug and we're playing with blocks and I get to talk to you and I got the color and this, that, and the other. But all of a sudden, if you put me in that desk and I got to sit still for the entire day, right? Like all of a sudden, what do I do? Right? What do I do with that? And even if I'm good, if I can just kind of get up every so often, right? And one of the things that I will oftentimes recommend is that you need to normalize giving young people time to move, right? So that could be a space in the back of the class where you can like just kind of pace, right? Or it's giving me a fidget, right? Or like a sponge ball or something like that, right? But doing that and normalizing that, those are all just strategies that teachers can do to shift the environment so that it plays more to what we need, and so if you think about it like, in the extreme, and maybe the way that most of us think about it is, if I'm someone who uses a wheelchair and every building's got steps, what am I going to do? Right. So the change in the environment is that we put in elevators, right? And so what we're looking for, where are those elevators in the other parts of our society, as well as, in our schools.
Okay.
That's the poet coming in right there.
Yeah.
I like it.
So you talked about the schools, but I think from what I've seen as a youngster growing up, because, I have eyes and I'm trying to segment it from me as a professional educator versus me growing up and seeing what I've seen as a kid.
Yeah.
As a kid, it wasn't more or less we segmented because some of the special needs kids growing up were the best athletes in my particular school.
You're right. Absolutely.
Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
We were like,
let's keep it real. Let's keep it real. Right.
We got Maine on our team. Like Maine got picked up first. So what I'm asking is like the cultural part. How are you going to change this segmentation of the cultural and the community? Because it's one thing where you can keep teachers and educators accountable, but how do you make the shift as for a cultural thing?
Well, you use cultural tools to do cultural work, right? So we're doing it now, right? Right now we're having conversations. We're using language. Language is one way that culture gets transmitted from one generation to the next. We utilize art, poetry, our films, the power of storytelling, right? All of that is important, right? So even just that, getting to the language, I was a kid, we all used the R word, it got tossed around real liberally, right? I mean, like I can be insulted all kind of ways, but if someone calls me stupid, that cuts me in a way that nothing else does, right? So looking at our utilization of language, and again, those cultural tools. I mean, conversations like the one we're having now are extremely important, particularly these kind of conversations in outside of the arena of special education. I mean, like I'm very blessed that I get asked, I do between, 35 and 55 presentations a year. A lot of them are at professional development days. They're at conferences that are targeted to supporting folks with disabilities. So much of the work that still needs to happen is having conversations like the ones we're having now, but outside of that arena. So, it's the conversation that CEOs are having, right? About how do they value the neurodivergent members of their staff and utilize their gifts and their abilities to be able to add to the bottom line. I mean, like even what you just said there, right? Like, yeah, so many of the star athletes in our high schools, in our middle schools, in professional sports. That's another piece that we don't talk a lot about. Kobe Bryant had dyslexia, right? Like I remember hearing a stat where it was like 40% of the players on the court in the NBA are people who have some kind of learning and attention issues, right?
Wow.
So many of the most charismatic, the most talented, the most gifted people who move through the world now and throughout society are folks who we would look at through one lens as being less than everybody else. And again, so much of it is about what kind of support you get, being able to play to folks' strengths. And then, and then there's the argument that, although we may utilize the word disability, given the right environment, many of us are actually exceptional. Many of us, many of those things that we think of as being disabling actually give us advantages in certain regards.
So that's super awesome because, like I said, growing up, one aspect they were great athletes. Another part was, a part of us growing up, we had mad jokes.
Right.
So you didn't really want to get caught in the class because of the social aspect.
Right.
So for me, it was like looking at cats, you better not say nothing because we know where your class at. Like sometimes I even joke with our friends still to this day, even though I don't know what school they went to or what their, issues were. But I was like, you were the one that had the classroom by the cafeteria, huh? Like your classroom didn't have any windows in yours. So that's kind of like the cultural thing, whereas someone may not have had a classroom with windows, or they had to put you in the basement next to the bathroom, or your classroom had a bathroom in it because they let you in the hallway.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So these are the things that these are just the nuances that I know of special needs students as a student.
Yeah.
As adult, totally different.
Yeah.
You have that were exceptional, and I think maybe you might fall in this, was exceptional in math.
Yeah.
So they may have had a phonetic issue where sounding words out, putting words together coherently, but you give them numbers, they like, it just clicks for them.
Yeah.
And that's why even as a coach, former coach, it was always fascinating to me, whereas I get a student and they said, well, he has this teacher. So I was like, okay, I know this teacher. That teacher's a special need. That's the hardcore, not the little, like, I'm just a grade level below. Nah, fam, you got to be over here.
Right.
And see him on a football field or a basketball, and I'm like, what? It seemed like everything. So it's like, no, I could move and everything, but I'm exceptional at this, but they're not as great. So now it's almost like, what is your talent?
Yeah. And Big O, you're touching on like so much that's so powerful there. Like one of the things that I've been saying for years is that for many of our students, you've got the IEP and there's a team, right, who are like, social workers, psychologists, right, learning expert, folks who are part of that team at the school. The part of the power that every young person has who has an IEP is that team is actually theirs, and they can determine who's on that team. They can add people on if they want. Our coaches should be a part of the IEP team.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Right. So again, part of the work is empowering our young people, empowering our families, and in some cases, empowering our educators to know, right, that like, anybody who can look at that young person and can speak to the places where they are exceptional needs to be on that team, right? Whether that be your pastor, right? Whether that be your coach, right? Like because I'm sure what you're speaking to is you're saying like, in a very practical way, this guy's got a spatial relations gift. How is he able to kind of move? I mean, and that speaks to a potential career in architecture, right? I mean, there are all kind of different spaces where if we're looking for mining the talents, the gifts, and then structuring a plan so that long-term this young person could be exceptional. It's someone like you, right, who needs to be on that team to be able to speak to those gifts. So yeah, man. I mean, I was an athlete going through high school. I ran track and cross country, captain of the cross country team as a sophomore, and I just ran my first marathon in 2019.
Yikes!
Yeah.
Moly.
And I don't want to take the steps. So
that's some stereotype right there, because in high school, the brothers didn't run cross country.
They didn't. No, brother.
Across the water.
Right.
You got to be across the pond to be a brother running cross country. You know, we was on a sprint. You know, the furthest sprints, you know, cross country we did was a 400.
Yeah.
And then we had to learn early. That's a sprint too. Like,
right.
What?
You gotta go. You gotta be all out for the 4. Yeah.
Yeah. They call it the man's race for a reason. Right.
Yeah. Well, you know, I here in Franklin, we had the Franklin Track Club, and
one of the second best ones around in Jersey.
Okay, I'll let you have that. I'll let you have that.
Willenboro is the best. Yeah. I had to put that in there. Go ahead.
So Mr. Wade was our coach, and he was the principal of the middle school. And I caught a flyer, you know, in 7th grade for the track club, and you know, we competed during the summertime, and so that's when I first started running. But my connection to distance running, it really comes through my father, who was a legendary cross country coach here in New Jersey, Raymond Horne, and he passed away last year. Thank you, brother. But my father, I mean, he built champions, man. He built champions, and had an amazing career. And he was a part of the first graduating class of Franklin High School, was the first captain of the first cross country team at Franklin. Won the first cross country race.
You know, Miss Curry, my gym teacher, she was from Franklin. She always rep Franklin.
Well, I don't know.
You know, Jamon Lyles, that track runner came out of, you know, Lyles.
My father was one of Lyles' coaches.
Oh yeah. We beat him.
Okay.
Yeah. Ask him. Okay. Big Mott did his thing down in Willenboro. I saw him, but he was the only one that gave him real comp in Jersey. Just keeping it 100.
Yeah.
Lyles, he was the truth. That's why I still remember him.
And you saw his son. His son was Kevin Lyles. Kevin Lyles' son. I guess that I think. Oh well.
Your son is doing his thing.
Yeah, in the Olympics. So.
Wow. So that's too old. Okay.
Yeah.
You were saying something about the Olympics, but this year I've seen a lot more people with disabilities displayed, you know, in this current Olympics that they had. It's been before, but it's just in this time I've seen more special needs with it. I mean, blind. I mean, everything. No legs. Well, I mean, that's a move for the culture itself.
The Paralympics, you know, and there's a lot to that too, right? Because
it's levels.
So the Paralympics, I think, has done an amazing job of just being more visible. Social media, of course, has really helped with that, right? Where we can see the clips and people are sharing that stuff more readily. And then Netflix did I think it was they did a documentary. I want to say it's Phoenix Rising, but they put a documentary out that was featuring Paralympians, and so I think that also brought a lot more attention to the Paralympics this year. My boy Keith Jones performed, did a rap, and was a part of the soundtrack to that documentary. So yeah, there is definitely more visibility. But yeah, I was saying all this to say that athletics, you know, particularly running distance, and then being a part of a team. I mean, that was a big thing for me too, because I enjoyed running, but the social interactions, the jokes, that, you know, like, because I was in special ed, I spent the bulk of my day with other special ed students. And so athletics also gave me an opportunity to connect with other folks who I maybe would not have been able to build bonds with, without it. And then I think it also foreshadowed that what I really enjoyed was not just running, but it was, you know, being captain of the team. It was talking to my teammates. It was motivating them, saying, hey, we're going to go out there and we're going to crush the enemy. I mean, like that was what I really, really enjoyed. And so that motivational piece is still a very important part of what I do today.
Oh, so you was like the Barack Obama of the track club then.
You
You took the leadership role in the cross country. Yeah, I got you. Took the cross country leadership role. I got you. But yeah. I'm looking at the Paralympics now. I'm just being honest. Even changing the name from Special Olympics to Paralympics was huge when I saw. I was like, great marketing. But then when I saw it some years ago, I'm not sure if you guys witnessed it, but they had I think it was in college, a young man. He was a W amputee, and he was running with those little bendy little joints,
the blades, right? Yeah.
And they gave him a little nickname. They was calling him, everybody know him as Tink Tink because of Cat Williams. All right, and Tink Tink went over there and beat the regular collegiate people, and they said that's illegal. And I was like, this is getting interesting.
Yeah.
Because never in the history of Paralympic, Special Olympic, did a Special Olympic participant beat the regular field.
Right.
And when that happened,
it's like an unfair advantage, right?
Yeah, and that's what exactly they said. They said he got an unfair advantage. I was sitting there like, holy moly. I said, those people who lost got to go through therapy now. Because culturally, he wasn't supposed to win. Because it was so many whammies that was there. But what happened was he ran a sprint and he won, but he was also Caucasian.
Yeah.
He was white. So it was like, you white, you beating them in the sprint, and you're a Special Olympian. So it was like, nah, he's not supposed to win that. And that's when I was like, oh, it's different. But then when I start seeing, like before, when in my youth, Special Olympics was like, someone that couldn't really run and they just wanted to participate. But when I'm seeing them now where they have the blind people run with the aid and how fast they was running, and I start looking at the times, because I look at times, when you come from elite schools and programs, you be like looking at forms and stuff like that. People just look at the race and you sitting at the end like, what was his time?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I had a debate with a person that was a troll, but I believe it was Usain Bolt. I'm just keeping it 100 with you. And we had a good back and forth exchange. And, and I ain't want to blow it up. Like, I was just happy that we were having a dialogue. And I was like, I ain't want to call it out like, yo, dog, I know who you are. But it was good because his time drastically changed. And I said, fam, all of us who run track knows that if your times drastically changed the way they did, said, a lot of times we know it's that stuff.
Right.
And you got to prove otherwise. Right. Because times do not move that way. And then this person, who I think was like, what about if this person trained hard, dedicates their life, body, and to the event and stuff? And I said, absolutely, you can. But that change would not happen that drastically that soon.
Right.
Now, and I gave an example, and I said, let's just look at myself, a middle-aged man, and I said, I'm going to get myself in shape. And then I just dropped down from probably running 100 in the mid 14, 15s, probably a good 18.
Right.
Probably mid 18s.
25.
Don't distract me. Not 100 now. Come on now. But, and I'm like, okay, but if I did that and then I just dropped down to a 10-1 in a matter of 6 months, you'd be like, I think that might be on something.
Little something. Little
something.
Right.
So that's why I was like, the enhancement things, but that's going too far off. Now, let me ask you another question, because now we're going to talk a little bit more about the poetry. All right. So poetry had a big splash because, we was doing poetry jam. That's when I first met you. Right. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, this, Maxwell, because, I feel some kind of way, light-skinned brothers and stuff, you know what I mean? So you up here, look, I felt like my Nino Brown, pretty mother. hit him with the Nino Brown, pretty mother. Coming in here, and then you got the name, LeDerick. I was like, come on now. Because, for a minute, I was going to be La Big O. But I was like, I don't know. It didn't have a good ring to it. The ring wasn't just there yet. I was like, nah. And then, I tried a couple of names that I thought was going to be it. But Big O is more my personality. And plus, people was calling me that anyway.
Right. It works.
So, it worked for me. But you got the poetry and you kind of get the, as I like to say, the smooth Maxwell. Like, you said some intelligent things. It was usually only thing I saw before from some of the people that was at the poetry shows where it was like people came in rough and raw. You know what I mean? They came in like, yeah, and Black Power, and we gonna kill the whitey, and when we kill them, and this is what we gonna do. And they're like, all right, that was good. Okay, I feel that. And then it was like, yeah, the ladies, I love you, and this and that. And you ain't go to the ladies, you just went for the intelligence. And I was like, what is he trying to do? You know, like, go ahead, you know, you light skin, you got the hair going on. You go to the ladies. I know what you're gonna do. That's what you light skin do. Look at your lips, doing that. You know, look. That's what they do. That's what they do. Like, you know,
jokes. Jokes.
Listen, I'm healing through my podcast, man. I got trauma. You know what I'm saying? Too many light skinned dudes that took my girlfriend when I was young. You know what I mean? It came up. So now you came in spitting the knowledge and everything, talking about the Black queens, and now you spit knowledge about, you know, the things that you went through in the educational way. But how do you keep the balance where you want to talk about the education thing, but you also have to keep the people engaged? Because it's like, yo, fam, you still got to get a little bit of ratchetness in there. So you know, right now they don't want to hear that. You know, they did it before. They kicked all of the, what is it called, conscious rappers out of rap almost. Yeah. You know, but you still kind of threw something in there. And I was like, and that's what kind of made me look at you like, wait a minute, he ain't so bad. See, I'm still getting over my light skin trauma now. I'm just putting it out there. Okay. Because I just be hating when I walk in the room with two of my good friends. When I walk in there, I call them bait. You know, growing up, I used to call them bait. Facts. Like, let them walk in first. They're going to give a good look. You know what I mean? See, I was in the middle. They was like, you ain't, because I used to think I was chocolate, you know, and then a couple of people was like, you ain't chocolate. And I was like, man, I ain't. I'm just in the middle.
I've always thought of myself as brown skin myself. I never thought I fell. I never thought I fell within the light skin camp.
Okay, so, wait. We have one lady on it. We got one lady on here. Excuse me, ma'am, Ms. J today. Yes. What category does that gentleman fall in? That gentleman right there?
I don't do colorism, sir. We're all brown people.
And I love that. There we go. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate
Moving right
that.
along, sir.
I discriminated all my life. We going to address it.
It's trauma. That's another podcast. Oh, it's another podcast.
All right, we're gonna address it though. We're gonna address it. All right, so now give us some of the techniques that you do to keep the people listening, and you giving them, you know, as we like to say, give them medicine and dog food.
Well, you know, poetry for me in college, like I was a visual artist growing up. And, you know, I have a degree in math, and then I minored in fine art with an emphasis in painting.
What college did you go to?
New Jersey City University.
Oh my God, you crazy as a mom.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate that.
Oh God, yo, condolences. You just said, I'm gonna go to the roughest places in the world and learn.
Rough? Right. Really? No, come on, man. I was all
in Jersey City?
Well, I was on campus, brother. I'm not out there.
Okay. We was in the school.
Yeah.
He went to Jersey City in the 90s. Wow. All right, I'm gonna just go ahead and be quiet.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I know what you're saying, for real.
Yeah. When you say it out loud, then you kind of like, wait, man, you got a point. Yeah.
Right. You know what though, man, but in that interesting too. Like I was conscious of the danger, and you know, we had open dialogues in the community about gang violence and you know, what was our relationship to the community and how we had to respond to what was going on. You know, classmates who lost their lives. I mean, there was that sort of, you know, of course that going on. And at the same time, school was also an oasis, bro. You know what I mean? It was an oasis, you know, where I felt like I had this shot, and I got to find a spot that was going to allow me to get a degree and get the support I needed. And and so I can say I also loved it. I loved it, you know. Okay. But yeah, with the poetry for me was like a new form of artistic expression that I was still very much growing into in the 90s. And so it did for me a lot of the same work that all art does, right? It was like a form of therapy in a way. It was also the space in which I was exploring just a lot of identity about what it meant to be Black, what it meant to be an artist, what it meant to be a person with a learning disability. And yeah, and I was working through all of that, on stage. And then I was fortunate to have a really a good, strong circle of peers who were also out there, in the open mic scene and what have you. And for me, what I decided pretty early on was that I wanted to make sure that my art was centered around influencing society, right, and helping to make the world a better place. And so, whenever I sat down, it was like, I got to write something. That's the space that I came from. And I actually, at one point in college, stopped performing because I didn't see where it was making a difference, right? And I was like, I was still writing, right, but I wasn't out there performing. But it was after I had graduated and when I started doing this advocacy work, where I realized, like I could pull the poetry back in and use it to show these young people a future that they didn't see was possible. I could use it, like I show up, and if I'm doing a teacher training, teachers, you've been in that game for long enough. It's like, oh man, another professional development day. I'm gonna look at 3 hours of PowerPoints. It's gonna be corny. It's gonna be boring. I get up there, and the first thing I hit them with is spoken word. And then I'm like, yo, it's going to be a transformational experience while we're together, right? And I'm still going to hit you with the statistics and the strategies and the research and everything else, but I'm going to use poetry as sort of the glue to make these ideas sticky. And so I still believe it is the poet's role in our society to be a critic, to help communicate what is possible, to be a voice for activists and advocates, to celebrate true beauty. And I think in our best form of communication, I mean, poetry is it. It shows up, and whether you be someone who's writing prose or whether you're someone who's a military leader trying to inspire your troops. People are pulling from poetry and poetic devices in order to be really, really meaningful and highly effective within those different roles.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I ran a poetry group, where I work with some students, and my students are ages from 16 to 24, and some of the poets were great, but they couldn't spell, they were dyslexic, but they knew what they wanted to say.
That's it.
They knew, and it was the greatest. It was colorful, and once you taught them, the verbiage and what different poetry terms were, and then they would connect it. Oh, I can do that. Oh, I can do this. I can do that. Then it was really, really cool to see them flourish in that, and they would love to come to poetry class. They would do horrible in academics because they would just be sitting there, having a teacher teaching, but come to poetry class. And then once we would, let the instructors know, look, this person wrote this poem. No, not this person who can't sit still in class, who keeps leaving class. Yeah, they wrote this poem, and then we would have that conversation. Then they would see them in a different light, and then, change up the way that they would do an instruction for them. So definitely, I just wanted to mention that because there are a lot of other celebrities that have a learning disability, but I don't see like a group. There's a lot. Whoopi Goldberg, I'm just a list, has dyslexia. Steven Spielberg has dyspraxia, which is something different.
What is it? I have no idea. What is dyspraxia?
Dyspraxia, it's something to do with like time, like it makes it difficult with handwriting and tying your shoes.
Yeah, it's like creating symbols and writing. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Dyspraxia. Justin Timberlake has ADHD. Tim Tebow, the guy who milled and has dyslexia. Why aren't this celebrity community, a little more louder with what they're doing besides in their movies and whatever they do athletics? Why aren't they a little bit louder with that? Because that's who a lot of these young people and young adults look up to. But I don't hear their voice unless I'm missing something.
Well, it's like yeah, you're right. Damon John, who we know from FUBU and Shark
Morgan
Tank.
Freeman.
Yeah. I had the great fortune of doing an event at Fashion Week, and I met Damon John there, and he told me that on Shark Tank, there are 5 sharks, and 3 of them are folks with learning and attention issues, some sort of diagnosed dyslexia or ADHD. And so and I've seen him on that show. Someone had pitched an idea about textbooks and him saying, I don't read books, so I'm out. Right. Like he was like very vocal, and he's done work. There's a website for families called understood.org. And he's done a series of interviews with his mother, and been very, very out about it. Some of it is also around, if I'm going to be like blunt, does society care? Right. Like, if I said, I like, just in passing, I like exotic cars. I mean, like there are all kind of TV shows dedicated to cars. There are networks dedicated to cars. We invest a whole lot of time and energy. And so that little fragment will become blown up, right? We don't necessarily have those same sort of spaces or that same sort of interest. Now it's growing, right? Like even for you to be able to have that list, right? Like there are more and more of us who are out there who have an ear to the ground, who are trying to figure out, okay, who has a mind similar to mine, right? So that we can have the strength that comes from community. But you're right. I mean, there's a need for more and more spaces. And my good friend and colleague, Winifred Winston, she has a nonprofit organization called Dyslexia Avocation that's doing great advocacy work down in Baltimore for Black families. And her and I just started a podcast called the Black and Dyslexic Podcast, where we're bringing in families, we're bringing in people who have lived the experience of having dyslexia, advocates, researchers, and we're having conversations. And part of it is to try to create this space, particularly within the Black community. Yeah, so I mean, there are people out there. And I think the more you become attuned to, what to listen for, the easier it is to be able to spot folks. But I think as a society, we aren't quite celebrating that to the extent that we should. And again, that's changing. Like there are corporations that are actively like building out entire departments that are just full of people who have autism, right? They're putting in, and they can look at the advantages of having people with ADHD, of having people with learning disabilities on their team. And I think more and more of that sort of spotlight and saying, no, there's actually value in neurodiversity and in disability and in difference. It's gonna create those spaces where we're going to be able to more readily celebrate, folks who are different.
So now,
have you ever? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So the part where I saw personally where someone abused it, where I was in high school and someone actually claimed exemption for their SATs, and during that time period they were allowing certain amount of time. Yeah. Because remember the SAT, you like if you had it, you got a certain exemption. And people who were in the know was like, look, claim it at this time, and then you get that extra time. Yeah. Related to a higher score, different scholarship opportunities, different, schools, because a lot of times, like when I went to school, the SAT was super huge. Yeah. So this is where I saw 3 particular students were taking advanced placement courses. Yeah. Then claimed, got an IEP, said, I'm having these issues, got it, and then got extra time. And I was like, looking at it like, they don't have no special needs. I know what classes they were taking. Right. You know what I mean? Like, that wasn't it. So I saw the abuse in it. So like, yeah, I see that part, but I saw the scam part. And then the other part where the other scam part of it was people that I know that were getting checks. Yeah. So that's the other part that I seen and was like, no, I got to get my next son tested because he got the same thing my other kid got. And I was like, yeah, it's called poor parenting. And that kid, ain't nothing wrong with your kids, and that's the other part where I'm not a professional. Yeah. I didn't go to school for it. I didn't take certain amount of classes for special needs. So that's a skill set. However, I could look at a kid and they can do work and everything. And I'm like, okay, well, what is the issue? and then the one that was plastered on every little hyper black boy in the 80s and 90s was, he got ADHD, like he got ADD. Like, no, man, stop sitting them in a chair for 80 minutes straight doing times tables and long word problems. How about have a little bit longer time on recess? You know, but so that's the other part of the game, whereas how do you get to the advocacy part without the scammers getting in and using it for their benefit and advantage? Because those are the two things that I spoke about. You know, there are probably many more, but those are the things that I personally said I witnessed these students when I was in school do the SAT thing, and then I seen some parents as an educator be like, "Yo, fam, yo, you foul," you know, like for doing this, and you just trying to get a check.
Well, yeah, Big O. I mean, there was so much there, you know, and so like to try to unpack some of it. You know, so one's like the check, right? So, you know, there's a way to get disability benefits, right? And there was a study, 5-year study called the Promise Grant that concluded a few years back, where I believe the funding came out of the Federal Department of Labor, and they were looking with Social Security, and that was part of what they were looking at. What were the interventions that we could provide that would allow young people with disabilities and their families to transition off of disability benefits, right? Because I mean, and prior to really learning about that study, I didn't realize that you could get a check for having ADHD, right? Like I didn't understand that. And I mean, you've got folks from all different kind of backgrounds, you know, whether it be poverty or not, right? Who are looking to try to get these different benefits. You know, the thing that I really am focusing on is that I do know that there are people out there who need help, right? And I also know that we oftentimes think of people as being helpless who are not helpless, right? You know what I mean? That like, given the right support, the right accommodations, you're going to be able to get a job, you're going to be able to go to school, do everything that everybody else can. Not all of us know that, right? Like oftentimes, like we got a lot more advice in our ear about how to get on assistance than we do about how to get accommodations and to live up to our fullest potential. The other thing is, you know, the scam thing, you know, with, you know, you're framing it as a scam with, you know, getting the extra time, you know, like that examples from your own life. But when you were saying that, what came to mind to me were these wealthy families out in, you know, like California or what have you, who, you know, I think some of them are still facing jail time because they were running all this very elaborate thing about how to get their kids in elite schools. And my community got, you know, folks with learning disabilities and ADHD got very upset about that because many of them were gaming the medical system to get a diagnosis that they didn't have so that they could get extra time. And really, it wasn't even extra time. They were using it to get in a room by themselves with a proctor that was paid off. I mean, like, and these were wealthy, elite, you know, these celebrities and what have you, trying to get into elite schools. And so it was a total misuse of the accommodations that, you know, people have fought for generations long and hard for to level the playing field. They were using that to commit, you know, egregious fraud. You know, what may happen, and I don't know the folks who you connected with when you were in school, but I have seen many families do this where they work very hard to protect their children from the stigma of having a disability, the stigma of being in special education. You know, so much of the work that I have to do personally comes from the shame and the embarrassment that I had to deal with being in separate classes and what have you. And so I have seen a number of families who early on in the child's life, they become aware that they've got a disability. And so they pour a whole lot of resources into outside tutoring, right? Like, and sometimes these kids, like their entire lives ends up being centered around academics and academic support and everything else. But they're supplementing their education outside of the classroom. They get them all the way through, and I mean, like some of these folks are going to be in honors classes. Some of them are going to be exceptional, particularly if you got that extra help. Your ability to perform academically is going to be multiplied. And then at the end of the line, when it comes time to take those tests, they are people who have ADHD. They are folks who have dyslexia or learning disabilities. They are, but then they disclose and make it known. And then they're entitled to that extra time. Here's the thing is, there are people who looked at the extra time piece and have done studies. And what they have found is if you take a neurotypical person, so quote unquote normal, and you put them side by side with someone like me, you give me extra time, and extra time could be, if everybody else gets an hour, I get an hour and a half, right? You do that for the neurotypical person, it generally does not make a difference, right? And it sounds like counterintuitive, but what the studies have actually shown is that when you do that for folks who don't have disabilities, they actually tend to score less on tests. Because what ends up happening is they put everything out on the table. They answer all the questions they can. They're done. And then you got an extra half hour, an extra hour maybe. What do? They go back and they start changing answers. They start second guessing themselves. They actually perform a lot poorer than they would if they had just had the standard amount of time. As for me, I'm someone where literally sometimes I have to draw on my tests to talk through and think through a problem, right? I got to doodle, right? I am going to get distracted. My mind is going to run off on all kind of tangents. I need some time for it to do that and then bring it back so that I can get to the work. I mean, there's all kind of like visual and auditory things that I go to in order to get what I know on the page. And so that's where my extra time gets used up. So I mean, like, again, I don't know the case that you were looking at, but there may have been some things behind the scenes, right? Where, and I've met those adults, like as a doctor in Houston, I had a conversation with via Zoom just a few months ago. And, she's a psychologist, and she specializes in supporting people who have ADHD, and she has ADHD herself, right? Like, I hear her story. I hear other people's stories who are like this, who, kind of went to the heights of the heights as far as academics go and have struggled with these issues. Some of them, like, your whole life is built around just investing time into school. There's no social life, what I mean? Because you got to put that extra time in, given the challenges to be able to perform. So, like I wonder, right? And maybe you can even speak to it, but I wonder, for those folks who are, like in AP classes or what have you, and you couldn't see maybe that they had some of these challenges, who knows internally what kind of stuff they had been wrestling with all those years to be able to perform at that level.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So like a couple of things that you touched on affected me.
Yeah.
So for instance, I had to learn in the last 3 years not to be on my phone when a person speaks, because I actually concentrate better when I'm on my phone, because I play a game to settle my mind.
Yeah.
My mind is on.
Yeah, brother. Yeah.
So many people used to see me. I have my phone and I'd be like this, and they be like, yo, I'm talking to you. And it's like, okay, let me put this phone down and daydream and look right at you.
Right.
You're like, I'm going to look right at you. And
Right.
straight. I'm not going to think of nothing you're talking about. When I do this, that means every word I can remember verbatim what you're saying and everything. And it's like, I had to learn how to not do that socially. And now watch this. I didn't know until I became, educator, that I had issues. Like real talk, undiagnosed issues.
Real.
Like someone like, Jason, forget you.
I know. I got a little bit of ADHD. I swear it's undiagnosed or something.
All I know is
I don't want to claim, but I'm saying, but there is something though. Like you said, as an adult, I did grow in school, but I was always busy. Like my mom, like LeDerick was saying,
Yeah.
It's everywhere. Like all day, I'm on tangents all day, but I can do 15 things at one time. So I think, and but you don't know, and you wonder why you struggle, in your career and things like that. But those are things you have to find yourself and figure it out. How to make the day go well, or how to make. Okay, I got this report due. I don't like deadlines and make me more nervous with the deadlines. I'm going to take the last 2 hours of the day. Anxiety, yes, you get a lot of that.
Yeah.
So, I'm really, really excited that we're talking about this, not just for, youth, but for adults too. And I don't know how much research is, into that. And LeDerick, you said this quote, you said, maybe reality is just a reflection on my own thoughts. What made you say that? That's super deep, man. Maybe reality is just a reflection of my own thoughts.
I don't know. Did I say that?
Yeah, it does.
Listen,
It
I
says
don't know.
LeDerick. It said quote LeDerick Horne. So a couple of your things.
She's
and it
talking
says
about like
maybe
not just now. She's talking about from before, one of your
okay.
conferences and stuff like
yeah,
that.
some in my research I found this, but even if you didn't, it sounds good. Even if you didn't say it.
Okay. Okay.
But
They gave you credit for it.
Yeah, it did say LeDerick Horne under there, but it said maybe reality is just a reflection of my own thoughts. I don't know how you think about things that you see.
Well, as it occurs to me now, I think that speaks to the power of our thoughts, our perceptions, what we value, what we focus in on, and how that directly manifests the world we have around us, right? The opportunities that we have, whether we see those opportunities as opportunities or threats or what have you.
Right.
That's how that's landing for me right now. Yeah.
Okay.
So have you ever wished that I wish I didn't have any type of learning disability? Like, don't label me. If you ever think that, even through all of this, do you still have that thought of why me? Like, why do I have to do this? Why does that have to do this?
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I wrestled with some of that, right? And kind of the really challenging time for me was I was like 17 years old, and I was like, I got one more year, my senior year, and then I gotta face the adult world, and I just had no idea what that was going to be. For me, it wasn't ever like the language of like I wish I didn't have this learning disability, because I really didn't use that kind of language when I was younger. I didn't want to be a kid who was in special ed, right? And I didn't want to have to expend all the emotional energy that I used every day to pass for normal, to like, so that everybody was like, oh, he's like everybody else. I mean, I was constantly afraid that I was going to have to read out loud or what have you. And so I wish I didn't have to carry that. Now, as an adult, I absolutely love the way that my mind works, right? I love the way that I am able to tackle problems. I think my ability to use language, to be a poet, to be an artist is directly related to how I'm wired. And I love to be a part of a community of people like Whoopi Goldberg and Steven Spielberg and Damon John. And I can say, like all of us may have struggled in school, but look at where we are now. So there are sometimes people talk about like you overcame dyslexia. And I was like, it's nothing to it's not a mountain and you climb it and then it's like, I'm done with that, right? Yeah. I have lived with it. I lived through it. I have integrated it into be a part of who I am. And like all the different pieces of me, it's something that I love.
Okay, that's super honor. Now, my question now becomes, what do you do with the other side of the game? Whereas I was just introduced to, whereas a person is exceptional in academia and they get an IEP. So I witnessed this and I'm like, okay, I didn't know that you can get IEP for being super smart.
Yeah.
And you have to have plans for them. And looking at it and seeing that, wait a minute, I don't see no plans or anything great. Now, as a parent and a person, it's like, okay, I got to implement, stuff because whatever y'all doing over there, that's too simple.
Yeah.
So how do you address that part? Like a parent comes in and says, listen, my kid is just basically ready for college and they're in the, 7th grade, and you like,
well, it speaks to the value of personalization in our education process, right? Like our schools are designed to educate sort of like the average, right? The average person. And so like my colleagues out in the state of Nevada, what was their state Department of Special Education is now the Department of Inclusive Education, because they deal with not only kids who will qualify for special education, but also those students who are gifted and talented, right? Like they understand that their role is to be able to make school work for everybody, even those who fall outside of, that sort of neat bell curve of the folks who are just sort of average, right? And I think another thing in there is that we also have to question this: who's smart? You know what I mean? Like who are the smart kids, right? Because I spent the bulk of my education in special ed, right? Who were with the folks who you would think of as, and our society is wrong on this, but we would think of them as not being smart. My last year of high school, I got to go into an honors class where I'm with kids who for years had been in honors classes. And I can tell you straight up that they weren't any smarter than the kids who I was with in special ed. Right. And even when you think about it, I mean, like so many of our best MCs, I mean, like I knew that growing up, like the kids who had incredible linguistic ability. I mean, kids who, spent time on their own, just going deep into topics, subjects, whether it be history, technology, stuff like that. Those were the kids who were in special ed. Right. Even me, and I don't put a lot of weight in the IQ score, but from the moment that I first got tested and was said to have a neurological impairment, it was also very clear that I was in the genius level as far as IQ goes, right? And that's the story for a lot of kids who are in special ed. If given, and this is the big challenge and part of the heartbreak, is that 95% of the kids who are in special education do not have significant cognitive impairments, which means they can do the work that everybody else can do, right? They just may need the work presented in a different way. They may need the classroom structured in a different way. But if that happens, they can do what everybody else can do. And in many cases, they can do far beyond what everyone else does. And you see it, right? You see it in the world. So, I'm a fan of, and, I don't know how everybody else feels about him, but of Elon Musk, who's the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX. We just had the first civilian trip to space, right? Where these folks spent 3 years in orbit, 3 days in orbit, right? And these were not professional athletes. This guy in like a little over a decade built a privately owned space company. Yes. If you've never seen it before, like he figured out how to shoot a rocket off and have it land back on Earth. Well, you should just throw these things away. He's got Tesla where he's building electric cars, and he's built the fastest production car in the world right now. He was on Saturday Night Live and came out as being someone who had autism, right? You think about all the people with autism who we think of as not being able to contribute to the world. And if you look back through human history, I think that a lot of our breakthroughs, a lot of the big contributions come from people who think a bit differently. And I would even say, within the hip hop space, you get a glimpse of it, right? And maybe it will happen over time where people will kind of get to the end of their careers and be much more open. But I think you're going to see a lot of folks who are going to be like, I had mental health issues, I got dyslexia, ADHD, what have you. And they were some of the biggest contributors to the culture.
Yeah, you say that about the aerospace. I just wanted to touch on that because they do have that on Netflix as a series you can watch right now. And it talks about that. But I know we're going to be bringing this to close here shortly, but the African American lady who's a part of that trip, her father was 19 when he started working for NASA.
Yeah.
He was 19.
Yeah.
And they allowed this teenager to work, and he was actually one of the people with what's his name that went on the moon? Neil Armstrong. When they couldn't land in the right space, her father was part of that team that landed them where they landed because the thing went out and they were able to guide them in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you're talking about, major things that are being done, with people. He didn't have any type of learning disabilities, but
that we know of.
19, that we know of. You're right.
That we know
at 19
of.
to be able to do that alone was just incredible. So I know that what are you going to say something?
I was just going to say what we can say at the very least was that he was exceptional, right?
Absolutely
and I I want to create a world that allows for all the exceptionalities that the human race has to provide, right? Whether you be someone who, I don't know, like all the ways in which, whether you're a mathematical genius, or you're someone who struggles in math, you know what I mean? Like you should be able to go to school and get what you need, right? And I'm even like, I'm an embodiment of both of those, right? So I struggle with basic arithmetic, okay? I don't trust myself to do mental math, but calculus was easy, love geometry. I have a degree in mathematics. All I need is a calculator. Give me a calculator to speed up the basic stuff. And then the more complicated, multivariable statistics, all that type of stuff, I can go in and have a great time at it. And the more time I spend actually understanding and learning about other mathematicians, some of the most influential mathematicians throughout human history have been folks who struggled in basic math, but could do the higher order stuff. It's actually one of the hallmarks of people who are really, really gifted in math. And so, but if you catch that person when he's, 7 years old and can't do the basic stuff in school, and if we live in a society where, God forbid, you're a part of a class or a race of people where we don't think a lot of to begin with, maybe you don't get all those opportunities. Maybe you don't get all that support to be able to realize your fullest potential.
Right. That's amazing. Now I know right now, to bring ourselves up to speed here, you do have a scholarship that you're just started doing. I want you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the New Jersey City University Foundation, the head of the foundation reached out to me, director, and it's something I've been wanting to do for years. So I've committed $1,000 for the next 5 years for a student who's getting support from the Office of Disability Supports there on campus. And so it'll be at least $1,000. And then I'm asking people to donate, to add a little bit more, so this is to help cover some of them books, right? Some of those, the financial issues that we all had to deal with going through school. And so it's for folks who are in their first 2 years, as well as transfer students. And I did that on purpose because there are a lot of us who maybe had an IEP when we were in high school and we think I'm good now, right? Like I'm not going to disclose, I'm not going to go to that Office of Disability Supports and get my accommodations. And so I wanted to give an incentive to have people register and to get those supports, because unfortunately, a lot of us don't access those supports. We struggle, and it may be, maybe we're in academic suspension before we realize, I needed that extra time. I need my book in an audio format. I need that help. And so, being able to provide support for those students is a big thing for me.
Question?
Yeah.
Okay, you hit something that kind of made me bugged out. You telling me in college you could have requested that your books be in audio format?
So that IEP that we talked about, that IEP, it does not continue into the adult world. But at colleges and universities that accept federal funds, they have to abide by the Americans with Disability Act, which is providing access, right? And so again, we think about access for people with disabilities as being like that wheelchair ramp. But for me, access to the curriculum meant that I had to have extra time on my tests. I needed to be able to use speech to text to do my writing because my spelling was so challenging. And I was able to take advantage of organizations that would convert my textbooks into an audio format. So when I first started out in college, it was tapes. I got a big ass box of tapes that showed up. But nowadays, kids can listen to their textbooks on their iPhones. But you have to ask. You have to know, right. And you have to ask. And and hopefully from this conversation, there are more people who are going to feel that, first of all, will know, and then will feel confidence to be able to ask for help. But you go to college, if you've got a diagnosed disability, you access disability supports, and it opens up an entire world of supports that can make the difference between failing and excelling.
Gotcha. Sounds great. Mm-hmm.
Right. So we could get your book. There is a book that you have called Empowering. I think you might have co-authored with some people, Empowering Students with Hidden Disabilities. I've seen it on Amazon. So that seems like, I didn't get to read it, but I would love to purchase that to, give some of the, instructors where I am, kind of insight of what's going on. So we can still get that on Amazon. Yeah,
it's published by Brooks Publishing Company. And then I have 2 poetry albums. And so the first one I put out is Rhyme, Reason, and Song. And then the second one is Black and Blue. And those are on all the streaming services and iTunes.
What gave you inspiration to name it Black and Blue?
So, again, it was the identity piece. So the 2 social constructs that have shaped my life and the colors that are associated with it. Black, African-American, blue is the color oftentimes that we use for disability. So you think about the ADA parking spaces, and they paint all that stuff blue. So it was that, and then it's a callback to Louis Armstrong, and the power of that song, and so Black and Blue.
Okay, all right.
They had blue pumpkins, I think, this year for students with autism. Instead of orange, they were blue, and somebody posted that, why would you put these blue pumpkins out for the? I saw that there was a debate about should you or not have blue pumpkins for Halloween.
I don't know nothing about them blue pumpkins.
I just seen it.
If I see blue pumpkins, I'm staying away from them.
They are blue, and they sold them in Walmart. They're blue pumpkins for students to represent autism and
I get it.
Learning disabilities. They were blue. They were blue pumpkins, so you can buy that. So.
Okay. Those are the reason why I call it that.
I like Nina. I've listened to it. Your poem about Nina. You need to listen to that one though. Take some notes.
Listen, man, every time I start listening to people do poetry, I think that I should start. I've been about to be starting for the last 18 years.
The world needs that, Big O, the world needs it.
And I always started off and I ended because my 2 words, butterfly, and I stopped right there. I said, listen, y'all don't need me. Listen.
Jay, you need to help him.
Listen, I'm just being honest. I got all the moves. I was supposed to be like a 50s, 60s R&B singer backup. I got the raindrops.
He want to be the dancer, a singer, a poet. You know how to do the moves.
See, diagnosed. I was undiagnosed. I didn't even know. I've been all over the place. Think about right now. You don't even realize how many things I got under my belt right now. Like real talk. Like if you really sat down and be like, wait, you did what? And you did what? And you did what? And you did what? And you did what? Be like, and I kept a full-time job while doing it. That's why I was like, yeah, I understand. I got issues. I just, I don't listen to the people who talk in my head as much anymore. That's all it is. It's like, listen, I know I ain't listening to y'all.
But before we close out, because my friends in the advocacy world are going to kick me if I don't say this. So at one point we talked about the Special Olympics and the Paralympics and them being a rebranding. They're actually 2 separate things.
Whoa, what is it? I don't know.
Yeah, so the Special Olympics is like a great event that happens all over the country.
Correct.
And it's folks with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities who are able to take part in athletics. Paralympics is like what we're seeing on TV now. That happens directly after the Olympics. And and again, there's an awesome Netflix series that look at para athletes. And so these are oftentimes people who may be amputees, who may have a degree of maybe wheelchair users, folks like that who are involved in it. But yeah, they're two separate worlds.
Things. Okay.
Yeah, there's
so
also there's a dope documentary called Murder Ball that I would encourage folks to look at as well.
I think I've seen it.
Yeah,
that was trying to kill each other in the wheelchairs.
In the
basketball.
Right.
I was like, "There's no way in the world I would play that."
I'm not doing it.
And some people didn't have disabilities, was getting in there to support other people. And I'm just telling right now, like, yo, fam, it don't look like you gonna make it out that wheelchair. Like, yeah, if you came in with one, you can keep it. They not playing it.
Hey, look, speaking of wheelchair, and I swear I'm getting off, but we're going to get off after this. When I was in college, right, and I sprained my ankle.
PCs, right?
I have to tell you this. This is important. So I was in college and I sprained my ankle. And so in order for me to get across campus, the crutches was too much. So I used the wheelchair. So it was a hand. I wasn't no electrical zoom, right? So I'm scrolling, but I got to a ramp. And I'm not used to wheelchair. So I'm going up the ramp and literally nobody's helping me. Like nobody's like, you want me to push you? And I'm like, got my backpack on the back. I'm holding on to a bar. I'm trying to scroll with one arm. Then I finally get up. I'm tired. I get to the door. Well, the door, you can push the button and it automatically opens. It shut too fast. So then it like smashed me into the wall, with this. And so just in doing that, it made me think about just an average person who really had to have a wheelchair. And that's a struggle. Nobody pay attention. People know he can handle it. People pass you by. They don't ask you if you want to help. And that was just for like a week for me being in the wheelchair. And that was terrible because there was no special, every now and then you would find a nice person who would, help you out. So that was like one experience I had in college. Second experience I had in college with this, we were in a science lab. And the girl who was beside me, she kept doing this thing like a pigeon, like, and I was like, everybody, she's on drugs. And I'm like, something is wrong. And then just out of the blue, she would go, so after class, I pulled her to the side and I was like, I don't know, I just want to talk to you. I just want to make sure you're okay. Is everything okay? And she started bawling, but she thanked me for asking her that she had Tourette's syndrome.
Tourette's, that's right. Yeah,
that
Tourette's.
was my first experience with somebody who had Tourette's syndrome, and she would just blurt out this noise. But she was thankful that I just took the time separately. I didn't embarrass her because I thought she was on drugs too. There was something wrong with her. But you don't know until you ask. And so those were my two incidences that I had with, quote unquote, feeling like I'm being disabled for a minute, and then, meeting that young lady. So. And ever since then, I'm always the one to help a person who's a little slower or needs an umbrella and they have a wheelchair and it's raining and I'll walk you to class with my umbrella. So, it's just things like that that touch the heart, and we're lacking those people. So we need to unlearn.
My question to you, Jay, tonight, like when they was making a bird sound, like, what did they pick that sound? Like, I'm just being real because
it's totally you don't have control, and sometimes we actually here in New Jersey have an amazing foundation and a center dedicated to Tourette's, and so I did a presentation for like 50 young people with Tourette's, and so beforehand, this is my first time. Like every so often, someone would be in the audience. And so like, you used to, if someone kind of does an outburst or what have you. But they were like, it could be like a couple lines from a cartoon. It could be a couple lines from a movie. To be honest, it could be racial slurs, right? They're going to throw, like anything could be thrown at you. And it's an involuntary act. There's no control.
The reason why
she had no control, and it was a pigeon. It sounded just like a pigeon.
Yeah. The reason why I asked is because I've been in 3 situations where a person had Tourette's, and all 3 were different curse words.
Yeah.
So when I first heard it, I was like, nobody gonna say anything because I was young. I was like, looked at the teacher, was like, I used curse words and I got in trouble.
Right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
but Bob gets to do it and it's all good, right?
Because I was like, when I first heard it, I was just like, all right, I'm gonna act like I ain't hear it. Then the second time I was like, looked at the teacher like, hey, okay.
Yeah. You know, for me, when I'm the person in the front of the room, whether it be Tourette's, you know, there are some folks with certain developmental disabilities who, you know, if they get excited, they're going to just like maybe make a moaning sound or yell or something like that. When I'm in the front of the room, I immediately speak to it. You know what I mean? I was like, you know, my man can't clap, but when I hear that noise, I know he's having a good time. And then everybody in the audience hears it, knows what's going on, and it can happen throughout. And then it's like, okay, you know, at least I acknowledge it. And this is, I think, you hitting like, this is a big one, man. Like there are some differences that are important that we normalize, we speak to, because the biggest sort of impact comes from when it's like silence, when it's like, we're not going to have a conversation about this. We're not going to talk about why my man has to get pulled out of the class to go to this little room for an hour. We're not going to talk about that, right? This is like, I'm just supposed to see this and not have a conversation, right? We're not going to talk about why there's a whole group of kids who have to ride on the short bus and they look like everybody else. I mean, like, we're not going to talk about it. Like, we got to talk about it. I mean, right. If not, there are all these misconceptions that end up rolling around in people's heads. And in my mind, that's what opens us up to bullying, right? Like that's what's opens us up to be mistreated. You know, silence isn't golden, right? So like we have to speak into these spaces, even though it may be uncomfortable, right? Even though we may be clumsy and we run the risk of maybe offending somebody or what have you, right? Like we need more public conversation.
Okay,
I love that. Speaking to the places. Oh, you got excuse me, a couple more things.
Go get you a drink. That's all I know.
And we're gonna, I'm good. It's not now.
Go ahead and get you a drink. I got it.
And we're going to wrap it up, but definitely make sure that Mr. Horne takes us out with his social media stuff and our stuff. And then.
Absolutely. So, like for me, learning, understanding, and having that dialogue and discussion, cool. But growing up, it was not spoke of.
Yeah.
And it was almost like you're being disrespectful for pointing it out.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, you know, because I went to I got kicked out of a couple of schools. You know, you could kind of tell. I got the So I was in the school and then I looked and a kid had it. And I was like, oh, this is the type of school we at? Because I'm good with it. You know what I mean? Because this is what we do every day, all day on my block. Yeah. But you know, we can do mother. Like, so is everybody a mother? Or just that mother? Like, that's all I want to know. So when he did it, and it was like, you know, think about being in the 7th grade and never experienced it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then when I see, I was like, all right, keep your head down, so because maybe the teacher ain't here. I ain't no snitch, so I ain't trying to down homeboy out. Then he did it again. It was like, all right, hey yo. I just got a detention for mumbling mother, and I ain't even say the whole thing at the time. He said it out loud out here at recess, and I think he was talking to another kid.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure because it was like we was lined up coming in for recess, and he was like, "Ma," like, and then you heard, "Mama." I was like, all right, what the heck? Because it was some type of stimulus, but I didn't know, but I was new to it.
It was a trigger.
Correct. So now for you guys saying that, I was like, okay, it's words for it. It's a way to conduct yourself. It's a way to address it so it's not a big thing. They didn't do that.
They didn't do that, right. And it's on the teacher to set the tone, right? It's on the teacher. Like particularly if you knew in the class, it's like, yo, this is what's going to happen, right? Here's what's going on. It's also on that teacher to empower all the students in there to know what Tourette's is, right? So like when you first look up and your homeboy sitting next to you notices it, he can lean over and be like, he's just got Tourette's, bro.
Yeah, you know what I mean? That would have been so much.
And then we can just move on, right? Move on. And then we can move on. We can get on with the instruction.
Because it took me a good month to understand what was going on.
And you can't focus on your work when you're trying to figure this out, right?
God rest his soul. Me and my man Jamie, we was sitting in that mug, was like, hey, somebody gotta be a motherfucker. That was just hilarious to us. We thought it was just the funniest thing in the world because we wasn't exposed to that. So we in this private school, these kids hit one, we sitting there like, all right, then it hit another one. Then what he used to do, because like I don't like anybody know me, I don't have a poker face. Everything I say, I know, I wear right on my sleeve. Like if I want to know, hey yo, I don't know that. Let me know, let me explain, like teach me that.
Right.
So he would look dead at me and I'm like, come on, man, listen. Somebody gotta be among him for him to say that. But then when the teacher used to be like, you two, and it's like, you hitting us for responding for with that, and you ain't never told us nothing. You just didn't say, I'm just like, I want to say, you get your motherfucking ass out my face. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I got it too. You know what I mean? Like, can I say call people? Because I promise you in my heart, I really do. I don't know, like, if I can get that type of restraint like the past, because I promise you, I'll cuss every one of y'all out. I don't even like being here. I ended up getting expelled from the school.
It's very different than when homeboy did it and when you do it.
Oh, it was definitely different.
Two different things.
It's very different.
Mine was going to be so selective. It would have been so smooth. Like, you know, I would have used it within the bounds of the language. Like, you know, this month right here don't need to be a hand talking to me like that. Like, I wouldn't have been just blurting it out. So that's what I know. And then the next time was when I was older, I was like, okay, I seen that before.
Yeah.
And it was like, but it was another word. And that's why I wanted to ask Jake Tanae when the lady did the pigeon sounds and ask you being someone of, you know, I want to say an expert, but someone is very knowledgeable of it. You know, do they get to pick a word? Because it was just like, it was all verbal curse words. So the first time just was funny because it was motherfucker. Excuse my language. The next time it was dick.
He just like cussing. That's all that was.
No. Because at first, now watch this. When I didn't know about Samuel Jackson and keep on using his word, I was like, technically, he might have an issue. Because remember, he always says MF in every movie. And he's in a lot of movies. They kind of actually listen for it. Like there's a whole skit and breakdown of Samuel L. Jackson in like a good 100 different roles and movies he's been in, and just saying the word mother.
He does have some type of language disability. He does. He has something.
I don't know. And truthfully, after I started being in some workshops and learning about it, I think everyone does. Everyone has a disability. It's just that we can manage it better than others.
Well, and the thing that I like to convey to people is that all human ability appears in some sort of continuum, right? So like you can say, you know, I have a hard time with math, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily have a math disability, that it's to the extent that you have a disability. My spelling, I have a hard time with spelling, but you may not be at a point where you have, you know, something like dyslexia. I mean, even as far as vision, you know what I mean? Like there are some of us where we got 20/20 and there are some of us who need glasses, and it just sort of continues on until you have people who we think of as having, you know, like visual impairments or blindness, right? But all of us fall somewhere on that spectrum, right? You know, like movement, whatever, right? Like, you know, social interactions, you know, all of that. And so I do, you know, and I think this is part of the next frontier is the understanding of difference as normal, right? That there is no standard human being. There is no normal human being, that all of us show up in this world with all this variation. And the reality is that variation is what makes the human race so rich. It is what has allowed us to be all that we are. And so it is something that we really need to celebrate and nurture.
Well, I just need to know what's your social media, where can we find you on social media?
So the best thing is actually just the website. So just LeDerick.com, LeDerick.com. So that's the website, but I just use my first and last name for all the platforms. So if you just search LeDerick Horne on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, it'll all come up. And then I got a YouTube channel as well.
All right. Well, Mr. Horne, we want to thank you very much for being on KROSS BARZ. We really appreciate it. Had a great time. check him out on LeDerickHorne.com.
It's just LeDerick.com.
I'm sorry, LeDerick.com, excuse me, LeDerick.com. And check us out, KROSS BARZ, KROSS BARZ. We're going to bring it to you again. Big O, take us out. Jamila Tanae signing out, Big O.
Big O in the house. Yo, I'm so glad to have Mr. Horne, LeDerick, and it was great. I definitely want to continue the conversation. But with that being said, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us here at KROSS BARZ. So, Big O is signing out. Deuces.
Peace.
So let's say this. Black Panther or Batman? You gotta pick one.
Black Panther.
Okay.
He's richer, right?
Gotcha. All right. Now watch this. Okay. Loss of hearing or loss of vision?
Loss of vision.
Okay. Nas or Jay-Z is a better rapper?
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm gonna go with Jay, but that's it's because you're forcing me to. It's because you're forcing me to.
What it is? These are these aren't easy. I got you. I only have two more. That's all. Two more. Okay. What is it? Jean Grey or Lauryn Hill?
Lauryn Hill.
Okay. And last but not least, okay. Philly cheesesteak or Jersey cheesesteaks?
Philly. I'm going Philly.
Okay.
I'm gonna go Philly. Yeah.
That's horrible. Being that you're in New Brunswick.
I'm sorry. Well, first of all, I know, right?
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah. I was like, yo, and they got rid of all the grease trucks too. Like, oh my goodness.
They don't have them, but you still could go to the spots. And
you can dip in the spot on Eastern Ave and still get the fat sandwich.
Get the fat sandwiches.
Yeah, I almost died eating the fat bee, y'all. Almost died. I got choked on the fat bee in my car, and I was in there by myself, like trying to drink water. I kid you not. I swear, a fat bee from the truck almost died.
I try to describe them to my children, and children sitting there like that sounds delicious. I said, it is.
It is. It's absolutely. It's the whole meal.
Yeah.
In one sandwich.
One sandwich, the whole meal. And they just put bread on top of it. They just put your whole meal together and just